Health scores are one of the biggest distractions in customer success. And I know this is a strong statement, but it's supposed to be. For the longest time, I didn't really believe it either. Health scores, they feel responsible. They feel like leadership. They feel like you're finally getting your arms around something that's messy and hard to predict. You have red, yellow, green dashboards, weekly reviews. On the surface, it looks like control. But here's where this really started to bother me. We had health scores and we had good ones. We had clean dashboards. Everyone knew which accounts were at risk and leadership felt informed. And yet we were still getting surprised. The same types of customers kept escalating, the same lifecycle moments kept blowing up, and CS felt reactive even though on paper we had that visibility. This disconnect is what made me pause, because if the data is good but the outcomes aren't changing, then the problem isn't the data. It's what the data is being used instead of. When something went red, the response was almost automatic. Let's look at the score. Let's tweak the weighting. Let's add another signal. Let's get CS more involved earlier. I've done all of this. Most teams have. And to be fair, those moves feel reasonable. They feel like you're tightening the system. But over time, I realized something that was pretty uncomfortable. We were using health scores to avoid the harder decisions. We hadn't clearly defined what healthy actually meant, not by segment, not by lifecycle stage, not in language a human could explain without a dashboard. So instead, we were letting the number speak for us. And when something went wrong, the number became the conversation. There was no ownership, there weren't any expectations, there was no system design. It was just red. And here's another thing I noticed. When an account went red, it almost always turned into a CS problem, even when the root cause wasn't CS at all. Product issues, support breakdowns, commercial misalignment, expectation gaps set way earlier. But because the CS was the most visible team, and they were already talking to the customer, already feeling the pressure, the work just flowed to them. The health score didn't cause that, but it quietly normalized it as CS work. And that's when I realized that the health score had really crossed a line. It stopped being a signal and started acting like a steering wheel. So instead of fixing the dashboard, we made a different decision. And this is where it gets uncomfortable because it wasn't a technical change, it was a leadership one. The first thing we did was force ourselves to define healthy without the numbers, literally just words. What does healthy look like for a new customer? What does healthy look like for a mature one? What does healthy look like for SMB versus enterprise? If we couldn't explain it out loud in plain language, we didn't allow ourselves to hide behind a score. That alone changed the whole conversation. The second decision was separating signals from responsibility. A red score meant something had changed. It did not mean CS owned fixing it. Before acting, we asked one simple question. Who actually owns improving this? And if the answer was fuzzy, if it turned into a meeting or a debate, that was a real issue. Not the account, not the score. It was the ownership. This was really hard at first because it removed the illusion of control. You can't just handle it anymore. But what it did was surface design problems we'd been glossing over for a long time. And this third decision was probably the hardest one. We stopped using health scores to drive CS behavior. CS wasn't rewarded for chasing red accounts. They weren't measured on how fast they reacted to the dashboard, and their role shifted towards surfacing patterns and asking better questions, such as, why does this segment always struggle here? Why do these customers go red at the same point? What expectation was set early that isn't holding up now? The shift, felt slower at first, but it was actually more strategic. And here's what we noticed change over time. There were fewer knee-jerk reactions, fewer surprise churn conversations, and just clearer ownership across all teams. Health scores didn't disappear, they just got quieter. And when they did light up, they actually meant something. The biggest shift wasn't the dashboard, it was the conversations that were happening around it. And here's the filler I still come back to. If you turned your health score off tomorrow, would your team still know what to do? Not eventually, not after they've had a meeting, immediately. If the answer to that question is no, the score is doing way too much work. If compensating for missing clarity somewhere else in the system. Health scores aren't useless, but they're dangerous when they replace leadership judgment. Strong CS leaders don't obsess over whether a score is accurate. They ask what the score would look like if the system was actually working. Because metrics should confirm good design, not cover for bad design. If this made you a little uncomfortable, that's probably a really good sign, and that's usually where the real work has to start. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.